You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 102 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. In today's show, the theme for the show should be topics that have been simmering for a while, but now they've reached just the right temperature to take off the stove and to talk about. And clearly, the biggest topic in regards to that is Anthony Davis, and he has officially requested a trade from the Pelicans. Isn't it surprising how that all works? So we'll be talking about that, possible destinations, what's best for New Orleans in a situation like this. Is it to hold on to him? We've seen teams play the waiting game a little bit, and it's been advantageous for them. Think back to the Nuggets with Carmelo Anthony. They did not flinch immediately, and they ended up getting a great deal out of the New York Knicks for him. In addition to that, we got the Celtics versus the Warriors recap. We got Luke Walton and LeBron James. What's going to happen there? Anthony Davis wasn't the only one that's been unhappy and looking to move, and maybe he will be the backup plan for the Lakers. Nobody's talking about that, but don't be shocked if that's the case. And in addition to that, we'll be talking about James Harden's continued streak versus the Raptors, which I think people view at this point as being not even worthy of news anymore. But man, I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm not going to get used to this. This is a fantastic run, an offensive explosion that's benefited his team. So why would I stop talking about it? But we're going to begin the show by talking about Anthony Davis. So a quick recap. It feels like the NBA is full of gossip, at least in the media, and we forget how we get to certain points. So I did this with the Kawhi Leonard situation. I do this with nearly every single topic now, because it's easy we end up at point D or E and we forget how we got from A to B. So what we have here in New Orleans is a situation where they have been mismanaged. And there's no question about that. And people look back to this past offseason when they didn't re-sign DeMarcus Cousins. Quite honestly, I don't think DeMarcus Cousins had any interest in signing there anyway. Remember, DeMarcus Cousins' first statement after he signed was no one in the league wanted me, and there was a bunch of general managers and owners saying no, we put through much bigger offers than Golden State did, and then he turned around and said, "Well, just deal with it." I mean, like what the hell? Like, I get that you don't have to answer anyone, but it doesn't mean you get to lie to us either. Like, well, let's not forget that. But the frustration that Anthony Davis must be feeling right now has to date back way before DeMarcus Cousins. And let's go back to 2015. And that's the final year that Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook did not make the playoffs when they were playing together. And if you guys can recall, that was when we started to really see the emergence of Anthony Davis. He hit that insane shot, buzzer beater. It was a double pump from half court off an inbounds pass to beat Oklahoma. And that was really the difference between Oklahoma not going to the playoffs and New Orleans going to the playoffs. And, of course, they ran into the Golden State Warriors. This is when we saw the emergence of the Splash Brothers as championship contenders. And Golden State took them out in a sweep. However, despite the first two games being a blowout, Game 3 was when New Orleans had a hell of a lead, and Steph Curry just went off. And when I say went off, he just started jacking up shots. And people forget about that. They think about how many points he scored in the fourth quarter, but all the offensive rebounding from the Warriors is really what got them back into the game. And of course, Steph Curry hit that incredible three to tie it from the corner. He was actually fouled by Anthony Davis. And Golden State would go on to win Game 3. Up 3-0. They finished the series off in 4 games. And despite how competitive they were, they did not have Drew Holiday. And if you watched the playoffs last year, you know how important Drew Holiday actually is. And if you had watched prior to the 2015 season, when the 76ers were the 8th seed, and they were able to beat the number 1 seed after Derrick Rose got injured. That was really the first injury that Derrick Rose had to his knee. Drew Holiday, during that run, because they went not just to the second round, but to Game 7 of the second round, and they very nearly beat that Boston Celtics team that was running on fumes at this point. Drew Holiday was one of the better players. So people at that time, they knew how important Drew Holiday was. It's not like he just emerged in last year's playoffs. That was with Monty Williams, by the way. And they decided to go in a different direction, and they got rid of Monty Williams, who I think is a great coach. And they went with Alvin Gentry, who was the lead assistant, if that's even an official role, for the Warriors. And they ended up going with Alvin Gentry. They thought that he would be able to work wonders with Anthony Davis. And no, we just saw disappointments to the point where they had to trade for DeMarcus Cousins, bring in Rajon Rondo, bring in Mirovic, and Drew Holiday had to stay healthy for them to make the playoffs. And of course, DeMarcus Cousins got injured, and they went on an even better run without DeMarcus Cousins after he was hurt. And then, of course, we saw last year, in last year's playoffs, they swept the number 3 seeded Portland Trail Blazers, which shouldn't come as a huge surprise, by the way. I know it was a 6 seed sweeping a 3 seed. You don't see that too often. But last year was odd in terms of how there was only one and a half games between these two teams, so it wasn't like a 10-game difference, which is what you'll usually see between a 3 and a 6 seed. So it wasn't that shocking. But what was more alarming was the weaknesses that were exposed from Portland, rather than how good New Orleans was. But then everyone thought, well, DeMarcus Cousins is going to be back. Then he bailed. And you still got that situation. And I think DeMarcus Cousins' departure played a little bit of a factor, but I think it was more Rondo and the impact that Rondo had in terms of how smart they were playing down the stretch. That cannot be understated. Rondo's a genius. I said this about Dellavedova, how he's basically a coach out there on the court. Rondo is that times 10. Rondo, I think, is the smartest player in the league right now. And the Lakers' struggles, everyone's pointing that to LeBron, and yeah, of course, LeBron's a better talent than what Rondo is. But I think a lot of it has to do with Rondo not being on the court and able to pick up things. It's kind of like the way that Tom Brady can pick up things, and he's already adjusting before teams can adjust. So teams are adjusting to Brady, and I don't want to turn this into a football podcast. That's coming. But teams, when they make their defensive adjustments to Brady, Brady's already adjusted. So it's impossible for teams to really recover from that. Now, Rondo is not on that level. Basketball is not on that level in terms of strategy either. But in terms of what Rondo can do for a basketball team, that cannot be understated. And playoff Rondo is a real thing. And they let him go. It wasn't like DeMarcus Cousins. They actually did not want Rondo to return for whatever reason. So that's how we got to this season and the frustrations. The other part of it, of course, is the LeBron James media. And he's been, ever since Anthony Davis signed on with, who is it, Rich Paul? I don't know. I try not to keep up to date with all the drama and who's affiliated with who and who signs which shoe contract and all that other nonsense. But he signed on with the same agent as LeBron James. And at that point, people like Jason Whitlock and others in the media were like, oh, it's inevitable. He's going to go to LA. First of all, how many times have we heard this in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years? Maybe even longer, by the way. Whenever a player is disgruntled, they're instantly tied to going to Los Angeles. Whether it's Paul George. Paul George was disgruntled. He wanted to go to the Lakers, right? He ended up getting traded to Oklahoma City. Guess what happens? He re-signs with Oklahoma City. Kawhi Leonard, he was disgruntled in San Antonio. Whoever's trading for him is basically getting him for 1 year because it's a sure thing he's going to go to the Lakers. All of a sudden, no, he doesn't want to play with LeBron. Why are we instantly jumping to the conclusion that if Anthony Davis is traded somewhere else, or even if he stays, if he's not traded because he is contractually obliged to play for the Pelicans? We keep being told from the players, and it's purely a business. Well, let's see if some of these teams will hold their ground a little bit too, for a business standpoint. It'll be interesting to see. However, I got a little bit sidetracked there. What I wanted to say though is, if Anthony Davis is not traded to the Lakers, how are we so sure that he's going to go there? The Lakers have had a horrible history of signing players. Before LeBron got to LA as a free agent, the last big free agent they signed, you have to go back to 1996 with Shaq. Dwight Howard came there, he was traded. Steve Nash came there, he was traded. Pau Gasol was there, he was traded. Kobe Bryant even. He didn't have a choice because he was a rookie, but he was traded to the Lakers. Glenn Rice, he was traded there. Robert Horry, he was traded there. That team has not drafted well, if we're being 100% honest with you, as well as that they have not signed well. In fact, some of those players have left LA because they couldn't handle the environment. Dwight Howard comes to mind. He opted for James Harden over Kobe Bryant. This is before James Harden was the player, like an MVP caliber player. So this concept of it being a sure thing, I'm not buying it. I'm absolutely not buying it. But what I will buy is I think he will get traded, and it's a matter of time. The Lakers have to make a move on this because there are other teams out there that will offer New Orleans better packages. And we're going to start with Boston. And of course, I've always said that, hey, if you can team up Kyrie Irving with an Anthony Davis and have some incredible role players that they have, that's a championship formula, an instant championship formula. It's just like ramen noodles. All you have to do is add water to that. But, of course, I was along the mindset that they could actually make that deal. Now, I originally thought either Jaylen Brown or Tatum, pick one. Like, I know Tatum is considered, for whatever reason, to have more value. I don't know why. I think they have equal value. They play a little bit differently, but they are so similar. And their potential is so similar. But pick one of them. I think, honestly, if I was the Celtics, I would be offering him Tatum because he has more value. For whatever reason. I don't think he's a better player. I think Jaylen Brown is right there with him. But you package him up with Gordon Hayward. You offer the 2019 Celtics pick, the 2019 protected pick from the Kings. And when I said protected, it's only the number 1 pick. So there could be a number 2 or number 3 pick. And then a bunch of second rounders. I've always said that now that trade cannot happen because of that stupid Derrick Rose rule, which nobody, and if they tell you they had heard of it, they're damn liars because we're only hearing about it now. But nobody had heard about this rule until recently, which makes you wonder how many loopholes are actually in the NBA contracts and collective bargaining agreement, and that we just don't hear about. And maybe this is a ploy by the NBA to prevent him from going to Boston. Because if he went to Boston with Kyrie Irving there, along with either Brown or Tatum, whichever one they keep, then what hope is there for LeBron James and the Lakers in the future? That's the paranoia in me. I'll be the first to admit that does sound overly skeptical, but it wouldn't surprise me. That being said, the only way that the Celtics can make a trade for Anthony Davis is to include Kyrie Irving. And that sounds like it could be a deal breaker. But let's weigh this up a little bit. They do have Terry Rozier as a backup. Terry Rozier, I've said this many times, in the playoffs last year, played like an all-star. Completely exposed not only Eric Bledsoe, who's a very talented player, has never put it all together, but he's very, very talented, very athletic too. If you were to create a prototype for the modern point guard, he would be right there. Of course, as I said, mentally, though, he hasn't put it all together. But Terry Rozier, that was considered a major advantage for the Bucks in the first round, by the way, at point guard. And Terry Rozier completely outplayed him. And then, you can make an argument that he outplayed Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons was playing point guard last year. Let's not forget that. And Ben Simmons, look, I wouldn't say that Terry Rozier elevated his game from the first round to the second round. It was more of a case of Ben Simmons just going in the other direction, his game declining. But I think Terry Rozier is I don't want to say he's a better player. I think he's a better fit for this Celtics than what Kyrie Irving is. And I think you've got to weigh that up. Because not only is Kyrie Irving in a contract year, so you don't know if he's going to stick around, But also you got to weigh up that, we had such high expectations. My God, I selected the Celtics to win the title because I thought Kyrie Irving, with his championship experience, and he wanted to win a ring without LeBron, just like Kobe wanted to win without Shaq, he would do whatever it would take to fit in. Based off what the Celtics accomplished last year, making Game 7 of the conference finals, I thought that was a no-brainer. I completely overlooked the fact that maybe Kyrie Irving wanted his teammates to fit in around him rather than him, filling those holes, because that's a great play. That's what great players do. They identify the holes of what their team has and what they need and they need to overcome. They don't force their teammates to adapt their games, who are usually limited. They're not on that level. It's usually the other way around. That's why you saw Michael Jordan go into the post in the late 90s. And he was essentially playing the center position on offense. This is back then when you actually had defined roles on offense. You would have the center or the power forward getting the ball closest to the basket and operating. Jordan was the figurehead of the triangle offense. Now, he could have said, no, I want to stay on the perimeter. Put Luke Longley in the center. How do you think that would have worked out? Not very good. So, and Kobe Bryant did the same thing, by the way. When he became the dominant player for the Lakers, a lot of the times he would be the figurehead in the triangle offense. So usually you see limited players offensively. They force their teammates to fill those holes, not the other way around. So I was very surprised when I saw that out of Kyrie Irving. And the Celtics have been worse. There's no denying that. The Celtics now with Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward, but Gordon Hayward is not on the same level as Kyrie Irving. We have never felt that way. But the Celtics are worse now with those two than they were last year. Now, some of that may be, as Charles Barkley has talked about a few times, he says when they reached the 93 finals, then their egos got in the way. After they reached the finals, everyone wanted a commercial. Everyone wanted the limelight. Everyone wanted all these shots. Well, okay, if that's the case, but that's effective, then Kyrie Irving should be embracing that and just be the fourth quarter closer and distributing the basketball. Pick and choose your spots and be an assassin. Come playoffs, how are you going to guard that? If Tatum and Brown and Horford and Morris and Hayward and all these guys are rolling, how would you guard all these offensive options and knowing full well that there's a guy that can actually carry and needs, basically a double team because he can get to the basket anytime he wants. You can't, if you leave a defender, it doesn't matter who he is, on an island with him, it's a mismatch. Now, certain players can slow him down a little bit better than others, I'll grant you that, but it's still an absolute mismatch. So if I'm the Celtics, I would make it look like, well, if we've got to trade Kyrie Irving, and I'm rolling my eyes here, then I guess we got to. But at the same time, you've got to pull the pin on this deal. If you can do it, if you can make this trade. If New Orleans is willing to make a trade, then make that trade. Now, the question has to be asked at this point, does Kyrie Irving become a weak spot in this trade because of his contract? Now, I would have said no about 4 months ago. But since this whole kumbaya moment that he had with LeBron, and he had to call up, quote-unquote, Bron, I'll never call him Bron, by the way, when he called up LeBron James and apologized to him and all this nonsense, I think it's becoming more and more likely that he's going to end up in LA. So what good is it for the Pelicans to take him on for half a year? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So does the Celtics, do they now have to bring in a third team? Because maybe New York would be everything that Kyrie Irving wants. He gets to be the man on the biggest market in basketball, and that includes LA, by the way. And he's the unquestioned leader. He can put up all the points he wants. He can do all that nonsense, right? Maybe, just maybe, and then the Knicks send some of their pieces to New Orleans, maybe that would tip the balance to the Celtics in that deal. But in the case of that deal, I mean, what do you give up then? Do you give up Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward, and Kyrie Irving for Anthony Davis? That might be a bit too much. That's a difficult proposition. I would still do the deal, though. And the reason I would do the deal is This is your potential starting lineup, even if you give up all those guys. I wouldn't give up as many draft picks if I have to do those 3 players, by the way. But let's assume it's Jaylen Brown. So you would have, and think about this defensively, you would have Rozier, Marcus Smart. There's a bit of inconsistent players, especially scoring from the backcourt. I get that. But just think defensively. Rozier, Smart, Tatum, Al Horford, and Anthony Davis. My goodness. My goodness. And if anything we learnt from last year is Brad Stevens is an excellent coach in terms of getting players in roles where they can succeed. I'm talking about role players. So I would pull that. I would still make that trade, but I would probably, realistically, I'd want to keep the top one, the number 1 protected pick from the Kings. They're not going to be able to keep that, but they'll be able to keep their own first round pick. If I could get away with that, I would, and that would guarantee that the Pelicans have plenty to move on with. They would have, say, Jaylen Brown or Tatum, and they would also have a bunch of draft picks to move forward. They would have Gordon Hayward, who you could trade in the future to a potential contender, maybe back to, say, somewhere like Utah, and get some more picks in return for him, and dump the contract. Look, Gordon Hayward's deal will be difficult. You're not going to get a whole lot of value for that. But a team that's close to contending, you might be able to twist their arm to take that contract off your hands. Then you have a boatload of cap room. Now, the problem with New Orleans is they haven't really been a great destination for free agent movement either. So that's the Celtics. We've got to talk about the Lakers because they are who everybody considers to be the front runners to get Anthony Davis. And they have to look at. I am almost convinced that if they don't make a trade for Anthony Davis, well, I say convinced, maybe not. I'll go with 60% probability that if they don't trade for him, someone else is going to get him, and he's going to fall in love with that city, wherever that is. So if you're the Lakers, the Pelicans absolutely have to take Kuzma. If they don't go after Kuzma, then what's the point? You're taking a bunch of bad contracts, even though they're rookie contracts. You have to take Lonzo Ball because he's got potential to be something. I don't know what that is. By the way, that could go either way. He could be a role player. He could be an absolute bust, which quite honestly he's been closer to, or he could be an all-star. And you've got to take Ingram because I think Ingram. Look, those 2 guys showed a lot of promise last year. This year is where they haven't. And then you probably have to throw in KCP just in terms of making the numbers work. Then you've got to probably throw in about 4 draft picks anyway on top of that. You've got to throw in, and of course that's spread out over 8 years because you can't do it consecutively. So is that worth it? Maybe it is. Especially if you think about all those draft picks they would get. Because LeBron is what? 34? How much value is in those picks? You would say maybe not so much in 2021, but this year's pick, there'll be some value. Even if they make the playoffs, it's probably not going to be a high seed. So you're talking about somewhere from 15 to 20. There's a little bit of value there. Not much. It's not like a top 5 pick. 2021, if you got Anthony Davis alongside LeBron James, yeah, LeBron, you could see LeBron starting to slow down there. So maybe that pick has value. Look, those picks actually, let me take that back. Those picks probably do have a lot of value. So that has to be the appealing part of it. But if you're just making the dump of Anthony Davis for draft picks, man, that's not because look, what you've also got to take into account is those draft picks are not guaranteed. This is not like the NFL where you land or where you finish in the season, you're guaranteed that pick. If you've got the worst record in the league, you're going to have the number 1 pick in the league, in the draft, unless if there's an expansion team. So you're only you're trading Anthony Davis essentially for some hope in rebuilding, and you are bottoming out, so there's an advantage with that. But at the same time, how do you sell that to New Orleans, your fan base? I mean, that's difficult because Anthony Davis, I wouldn't say he's a generational player per se. When I talk generational player, you're talking about like say Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Shaquille O'Neal, players like that. Wilt Chamberlain. He's not quite on that level, but this guy is a perennial all-star, and he's not that far off MVP voting. In fact, I think last year, had he had played the way that he played over the last 25 games for the entire regular season, I think he would have won the MVP. I would have voted for him even over James Harden. And James Harden played incredible last year too. So that's the options for the Lakers. If the Pelicans are willing to take that deal, the Lakers would be insane to not to do that. Because if you got those two pieces and Kyrie Irving becomes a free agent, which he's going to become a free agent, what are the odds then that you've got an upgraded trio from Cleveland? And you've got Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, and instead of Kevin Love, you have Anthony Davis. And everybody would agree that Anthony Davis is an upgrade, is a massive upgrade over Kevin Love. So you find those pieces to fit around your team in order to truly contend. Maybe it becomes a truly desirable destination to some of those role players in the league. Maybe it's not, but as I said, I think you have to pull the trigger. And this is why I think New Orleans holds all the cards, because they have a lot of teams that would jump to get Anthony Davis, even if he's disgruntled. They're not selling him pennies on the dollar. This is not a situation where Kyrie Irving is threatening to sit out, and they know that they're in their last real opportunity for a championship because LeBron's going. So he took advantage of that situation, and the Cavs had to blink in that circumstance. The other destination that nobody's talking about is Philly, because you could possibly trade Jimmy Butler plus Fultz, and yeah, Fultz is not appealing, but I'll tell you what is appealing: first round picks. In 2019, 2021, the Miami Heat pick in 2021, which will probably be more appealing because Wade will be gone. They don't have any superstars. They've got a bunch of role players that are emerging as potential all-stars, but not superstars. And then their 2023 pick. That's a lot of talent. And who knows what happens with Fultz? I got a question from a contributor on the Facebook page, Zoe, and he was saying, is it time that Chicago takes a look at Fultz? And I said, absolutely. Because, there's a perception that Fultz's career is over. I think his career in Philly is over, but I don't think his career in the NBA is over. I've got one name for you guys who think that his career is over. Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups was traded in his first year as a rookie. He was the third pick in the draft, just behind Tim Duncan and Keith Van Horn. He was taken ahead of Tracy McGrady. And he was traded to Toronto for Kenny Anderson, a veteran Kenny Anderson. He was no longer an all-star. And Kenny Anderson had just been traded from Portland to Toronto just a couple of weeks prior to that. So the question was, why would you trade, an 8-9 year guy at that stage in Kenny Anderson for a rookie if you're Boston? It's a crazy deal. And then you look at, Chauncey Billups should be in the Hall of Fame. Won a championship. How many conference finals did he lead his team to offensively? I know Ben Wallace was there, but the offensive leader on that team was Chauncey Billups. There's no doubting that. Even though you had Richard Hamilton, you had Rasheed Wallace. The offensive leader was, without question, Chauncey Billups. He set the tempo of that team. That's why he was the Finals MVP in 2004. Multiple-time All-Star. And I'm not saying that Fultz is definitely going to relive that. But that being said, if we were to judge Chauncey Billups off his first landing spot in the NBA, we would think he was an absolute bust. So who's to say that Fultz, given the right opportunity, won't find his game? I know it's not in Philly. I'd be shocked if it's in Philly after everything that's happened. Look, that fan base wants to win now. They have no patience, which is funny because the same fan base which apparently trust the process. They should realize they're not that far away from competing for a title, legitimately contending, but they're not there yet. But yet they have no patience, it seems, for Fultz. So I think Fultz' time there is done. And if they are able to put that trade together, then you have Simmons, then you have Embiid, and you got Anthony Davis. That is a scary, scary trio. Because they're all pretty much around the same size. That's what makes it incredible. And in terms of just rim protection and rebounding, you can really control the pace of a game if you have those three dominant players. Because Ben Simmons is clearly the point guard. And he is probably the best rebounding outside of Westbrook and shot blocking point guard. And you have Embiid, probably the best rebounding and shot blocking center. And then Davis would be the best rebounding and shot blocking power forward. You have the best three at those critical areas at their positions. It doesn't even matter who's playing the other two positions. You've basically won that because there's only 5 players on the court. Once again, if New Orleans is interested in making that deal, Philly would jump at that. Now, I can talk all these hypotheticals all I want. What you probably want to know is what I think will happen. And the trade deadline is only, a week away? I think if he's going to be moved, it will be to LA. If it's prior to the deadline, it will be to the Lakers. That's my gut feeling. I don't like it. But I think at some point, will the Pelicans be like, you know what? No, the Lakers really caused this. They caused this disgruntled, and that's why it's not a surprise. LeBron's camp started this. We know that. Look, if you've been paying half attention to the NBA this season, you will have heard and been like, this is not a surprise. But it would have been a surprise based off Anthony Davis's career so far that he's actually demanded and his temperament. But this is not a surprise now based off everything. Like it's happened so many times before. It's like it becomes so predictable. It really does. So if I'm the Pelicans, I would understand why they would be like, you know what, we'll trade him anywhere except for the Lakers. I could understand that. I really could. Now, speaking of the Lakers, we're going to segue into Luke Walton and LeBron James and talk about predictability. I had JC Conley on the podcast prior to the season, and he was telling me how he was not sold on Tyronn Lue being a good coach. And quite honestly, he was right. Tyronn Lue was shown the door pretty early this season. For what it's worth, Larry Nance Jr. Oh, not Larry Nance, Larry Drew. Sorry. Larry Nance has actually played well. Larry Drew has not been that much better in terms of results. We've seen a little bit more focus and intensity, but that may be more of the result of Della Vedova being back on the Cavs than Larry Drew. That being said, I said to him, because he felt that he was confident that the Lakers would not experience this kind of turmoil because Luke Walton was a good coach. And I said to him point blank, if we start to see this kind of drama that we saw in Cleveland and the questioning of the coach and stuff of that nature, would he change his tone? He said, absolutely. And now we're seeing this. And yes, I know it came from LeBron's camp that he wants Luke Walton fired. What? Like, are you kidding me? Like, okay, so on one hand, you got this guy who's this fearless social warrior. That makes me laugh, by the way. But he's this fearless, courageous, fighting the evils of Trump, fighting the evils of police brutality, fighting all those evils, but yet he doesn't have the balls to get up and say, and put his name on wanting Luke Walton be fired. He'll let his camp do it, but he won't do it himself. Wow. Just wow. That is the surprising part in all of this. Actually, I shouldn't be surprised. Because this facade that his perception, that his brand and his image that he's tried so hard to manipulate. A part of that is he's meant to be a good guy. He's not. He's a prima donna and he's a diva. He's an attention seeker. It's unbelievable how much this guy wants to be liked. But that being said, he wants it all his own way. And Luke Walton is not a bad coach. I can't believe I'm saying this. I have to defend this guy. People think Luke Walton's a bad coach. I can make an argument right now that Luke Walton is a better coach than Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr inherited the team from Mark Jackson. Mark Jackson did all the hard work in rebuilding that team. Before Mark Jackson got there, the Warriors were a laughing joke. They were they were like, the fans hated them. Their own fans hated them. I remember, who was it? Was it Chris Mullin who was getting his jersey retired? And they booed the hell out of their owners. You know why? Because they were sick of losing. They had just traded Monta Ellis for Andrew Bogut. The reason why they traded him was actually genius, because it opened up shots for Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Ellis was a very good player at that time. He was their best player, and this includes Barrett Davis, by the way. He was their best player on the We Believe team, the team that knocked off the 67-win Dallas Mavericks team in the first round as the number 8 seed. So when they traded him for Andrew Bogut, who Bogut at some point looked like he was going to be an NBA All-Star and that, but then he broke his arm. Thanks to Murray Stoudemire, by the way. But he broke his arm. He was never the same. But they brought him in because he was a shot blocker and he didn't play on the perimeter. He didn't require shots. But they hated that trade. So Mark Jackson was the guy that actually turned that Warriors team completely around. He deserves all the credit in the world for the championship. There were some things that he didn't do right. I 100% agree with that. And Steve Kerr does deserve some credit in terms of seeing Draymond Green being the point guard and benching Iguodala to allow Harrison Barnes to start, to balance out the team a little bit. David Lee was an all-star. People talk about the sacrifices that Iguodala made, but David Lee made a huge sacrifice on the team. But Mark Jackson turned that team, not just turned them around, but turned them into borderline contenders. Because even though they were the 6th seed when they first made the playoffs, they went on, and they looked like they could really beat the Spurs. They were unlucky to not have a 2-game-to-none lead on the Spurs, despite being the number 6 seed, and going into San Antonio those first 2 games. Game 1, against the Spurs, the Warriors had a huge lead. They let it get away from them. Manu Ginobili hit a huge 3 down the stretch. Game 2, the resolve shown by the Warriors was incredible because they were able to bounce back and win Game 2. After that, the Spurs pretty much controlled the rest of the series. The Warriors only won 1 more game, but it was an incredible run, and Mark Jackson showed them the way. Steve Kerr did take them to the next level, but I would argue that Mark Jackson had more to do with their initial success than what Steve Kerr did. So what does this have to do with Luke Walton? Luke Walton, after I mentioned this guy before, Alvin Gentry was the lead assistant. And then he went to New Orleans. Luke Walton became the number 1 assistant. And then to start off the 2016 season, the season that they actually won, 73 games? Luke Walton had a better record than Steve Kerr did as a head coach. This is not new, by the way. In 2017, Mike Brown had a better record in the playoffs than what Steve Kerr did. This is why I don't rate Steve Kerr as a coach. I really don't. I think he has a lot of talent. He just sort of sits there with his legs crossed and, smiles, but he's terrible at making in-game adjustments. That's why we nearly saw the Cleveland Cavaliers beat them in 2015. It wasn't until he inserted Iguodala in Game 4 of the NBA Finals that they actually didn't look back. But prior to that, and why would it take him till Game 4 to make that change? He's not that good at it. And it wasn't in-game, by the way. That was before the game because he was starting. So the point that I'm making in all this is Luke Walton's a hell of a coach. If you think that Steve Kerr's a great coach, I think Luke Walton's right there with him. And he's done a very good job in the post-Kobe Lakers. Prior to that, they had Byron Scott. And they did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. All they were doing was losing games, and fans were petrified that they were going to lose their draft picks to Phoenix. Because if you remember that trade with Steve Nash, they had to give up their draft picks, a couple of draft picks to bring Steve Nash in. And of course they were protected all the way through to last season. So the point that I'm making though in all of this is Luke Walton has not been considered to be a bad coach until this year. And yet LeBron James, for whatever reason, who's so obsessed with winning, can't seem to make it work with this guy. Why? I don't know. Is it because he holds him accountable? Once again, deja fucking vu. Because his most successful tenure anywhere, LeBron James that is, was in Miami. And guess who that was under? Eric Spoelstra. Eric Spoelstra held him accountable. And then he wanted to get him fired, and Pat Riley told him no, that is not going to happen. Is there any surprise that he bolted the first chance he got after that? Absolutely not. So the point that I'm making in all this is this was predictable too. Doesn't mean I'm any less pissed off at it. But Luke Walton, like the New Orleans Pelicans with Anthony Davis, Luke Walton will have a host of desirable coaching jobs if he is let go. This isn't going to be a Mark Jackson situation. As wrong as that is, by the way, too. But Luke Walton, he will land anywhere he wants. If he wants to go to the Knicks, if he wants a big market situation, or Chicago, or whatever, he will go there. If Greg Popovich resigns, he will be the one that they will probably go after. You know, he could probably pick any. You know, I'm trying to think. Boston wouldn't. They absolutely wouldn't because they got Brad Stevens. You know, if he wanted to go to Portland, they would make room for him. Teams would fire their coach. It doesn't matter how successful they are. They would fire their coach in most situations to get him. I think Indiana would probably keep McMillan because McMillan's done so well. Same with Snyder in Utah, but there's very few teams that would not jump at the opportunity to bring Walton in. And the fact that, you know, all his young players have pretty much been either traded or rendered useless with the exception of Kuzma. You know, this was, before LeBron got to the Lakers, everyone was excited about the nucleus that they had there. You had Ball, you had Kuzma, you had Ingram, you had Randall. You had a lot of young talent there. Now, all of a sudden, with the exception of Kuzma, they're all garbage. I thought this guy makes players better. So he's not only is he uncoachable by really good coaches, but, and I mentioned Mike Brown a second ago too. He was another guy that was meant to not be a good coach. So they had to fire him in order to appease LeBron before he bolted anyway. And then, as I mentioned before, he had a hell of a run in the 2017 playoffs. The pattern is quite alarming when you look at it. And it makes you wonder how much of this noise that you hear online or the emails that I get or whatever, are they bots that are just sending me this? It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me because all you have to do is open your eyes and look at the history of LeBron James. He makes players around him worse, and he makes coaches around him worse. It's insane. It really is. Anyway, I've got to speed this up a little bit. I've been talking for 40 minutes already, and I've gone through 2 topics. Okay, so the Celtics and Warriors. This is why I think the Celtics need to make the move for Anthony Davis, by the way. They need a true defensive identity on this team. They have a lot of offensive talent, but you know, if you, like Marcus Smart, when Marcus Smart came into the game, you saw a defensive identity with this team. They need to find a way to get him more minutes, but how? How are they meant to get him more minutes? Because they are log jammed on the perimeter. They can't even find Rozier a lot of minutes, and Rozier's talented. So I think, you know, if you are able to bring in Anthony Davis, that perimeter shores up as well as the post because they have help behind them. And those perimeter players are fantastic at actually helping the helper. It's a very underrated thing. Watch it in basketball. Watch when somebody gets beaten. You'll see the good defenders from the shocking ones when they're beaten on a play. And what do? Do they give up on the play once they're beaten? Or do they rotate down to help the guy that's rotated over to cover their mistake? It's a very simple thing to look for in basketball, and it'll instantly identify who the good defenders are in the NBA. Speaking of the Warriors, look, the Warriors are looking great. I'm still concerned, though, because it's only early. This is the honeymoon stage with DeMarcus Cousins. At what point does that wear off? And we've seen it before with players such as Draymond Green. Now, the Warriors, they may have just woken up. They may have just been sleepwalking the first part of the season. I get that. And if they get it all together, they're a very hard team to beat. I don't think they are as unbeatable as other people have made them out to be. And quite honestly, that will be an episode in the coming, probably in the next week. Just how do you beat this team? Because I think they are beatable. As for the game itself, look, there was an increased intensity. I think all that preseason talk about this being a finals preview, came to the forefront. Steph Curry played very well. Kevin Durant played very well. Smart, as I said, played well. There was I hated that call at the end. I really did, because I thought it was a soft call on Klay Thompson. But what pissed me off the most is if you're going to call that soft call, then you're going to call it on the other end as well. And I would not have liked it if they did not call it on Klay Thompson, the foul on Klay Thompson, but then they called Klay Thompson for the foul when he was guarding Kyrie Irving, for what it's worth. I would have hated if that was the finish. So I am consistent with this, but I hate it when it's the other way around, and they bail out Klay Thompson, and then they swallow their whistle the very next play down. I don't like make-up calls, but that being said, get the fucking call right in the first place, please. That being said, it's one game, but it did sort of, as both teams played well against each other, they didn't take it easy. So I think that you can see what I'm talking about in terms of the logjam. Why have a logjam on the perimeter and be thin up front if you're the Celtics? You want balance. There's no point going 5 or 6 deep on the perimeter and going too deep inside. There's no point in that. Because you want to be... Unless if you start playing all 5 positions are perimeter positions, there's no point in that. It's silly. The other one is Blake Griffin to the Lakers, maybe. Look, Blake Griffin is also unhappy. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to go really quickly here. The Pistons are not playing well. They're probably about 2 players on the perimeter, 2 consistent players on the perimeter, I should say, away from being a genuine contender in the Eastern Conference, and they're not going to get that anytime soon. Blake Griffin probably is a bit butthurt still by being traded from the Clippers, and a big reason that he probably loved being in LA. So if he loved being in LA, but he hates the Clippers now, it probably would make sense for him to explore options going back to Los Angeles to play for the Lakers. And he could be their backup plan. If all goes awry with Anthony Davis, but they're still able to bring in Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Blake Griffin. That's not a bad combo at all. You'll be very competitive with that. So that's interesting. And the funny thing is you wouldn't have to unload all those players to get Blake Griffin like you would have to for Anthony Davis. So you would still probably be able to keep Kuzma in that situation. You'll be able to keep some of those picks. Not that they seem to care about anything apart from the right now in Los Angeles. And the last one is, look, James Harden, man. That was the matchup up against Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard, for a variety of reasons, is considered to be and rightly so, is considered to be the best defender in the NBA right now. And James Harden continues to deliver. And people, you want to talk about, you want to say it's selfish, you want to say it's stat padding or whatever. Bullshit. It is not stat padding, because all you got to do is look at his production when he's had help around him, when he's had a healthy Chris Paul, when he's had a healthy Clint Capella. He has not gone on a scoring tear like this. The bottom line is the Rockets have needed him to do it, and he has stepped up in ways unimaginable. Nobody could have predicted this coming into this season, or even in the first quarter of the season when they were struggling but everyone's going to identify it because of the addition of Carmelo Anthony. So when you take into account that his team absolutely needed this and he is providing it, that just amplifies exactly what he's doing. I think this is historic, and I think if anybody is critical of it, I think they're just, honestly, probably jealous. Jealous that their favourite player is not doing it, or their favourite team is not able to stop it. Yeah, he does get a lot of nonsense foul calls on his defenders. I get that. But if we're going to start using that against players, then we're going to start, discounting what LeBron does. Are we going to start discounting what Kevin Durant does? I mean, Kevin Durant was actually walking out of bounds, touching the ball, and they didn't call that. How did they miss that? And that led to a Steph Curry jumper. Nobody says Kevin Durant gets away with foul calls or gets superstar calls for him. We can go all the way back in NBA history. We can go to Kobe, we can go to Shaq, we can go to MJ, Hakeem Olajuwon. We can talk about all of it. Magic. Think about Magic's junior skyhook. That should have been the Celtics ball, by the way. Larry Bird got a lot of foul calls too. Then there's it's cherry picking, and it's pathetic, because if that's the standard, then you probably shouldn't watch the NBA, because you're going to be furious with it. Because for whatever reason, that's become a part of, the accepted fan experience, that there will be superstar foul calls. So, as I said, if you love basketball, you should probably be appreciative of this run by James Harden. Anyway, guys, 50 minutes in the books. I hope you had a good weekend. It is snowing here, which is not good. It's not a good start. It's going to be freezing here, so I might do some more episodes this week. If not, there will be an NFL podcast coming up this week. I will let you guys know how you can download it, how you can listen to it. There will be probably quite a few episodes on that once we were launched, just based on the fact that it is Super Bowl week. Thanks so much for spending your Monday with me, and I hope you guys have a great week regardless, and stay safe out there.